I know it's been a little while since my last iPhone SE video, but I wanted to give it a little bit more time so that I can put together my thoughts and perspectives on this great little $400 phone. This is Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here are my top 5 complaints and takeaways on the iPhone SE 2020. So by now you guys should know the drill. These particular videos are just my way of sort of highlighting certain parts of a device that you might think of when you use it yourself. And then of course I added on the takeaways to give it a more balanced perspective so that I can tell you what things I have sort of gleaned from my time with this particular smartphone. I think there's no other way to start the takeaways portion of this video than by saying, you know what, value is definitely in. But I also know that a lot of you in the comments are going to say that, well, phones like this are a dime a dozen. And that's true, especially in markets outside of North America, in particular outside of the US. And we've had plenty of other examples of low-cost, good-performing smartphones in the mid-range segment. The Pixel 3a is still beloved by many geeks out there, we all miss the Sony compact editions, and the iPhone continues to have stiff competition in areas where Chinese brands like Realme have been churning out low-cost phones in 2020. But here in the US in particular, Apple blew the doors off of the whole value for money prospect and reminded everybody that you could get a good smartphone from a company that historically has more expensive products at a good price. And the ripple effects can be very much seen from other companies whose marketing ramped up for their mid-range devices. So no, Apple was not the first company to put out a phone that is very affordable but still had the right specifications and the right experience, more importantly. Instead, Apple just sort of rekindled that trend, and it's something we're seeing in more places because Apple has that market penetration. But the thing about this $399 phone is that it kind of stands alone. One size seems to fit all here. There's one version of this phone which people might find as a problem when they want bigger, well, everything. It should be obvious what parts of this phone could use a bit of a boost, and we'll get to them as this video goes along. While I might not go for whatever Plus Max Pro model Apple would create if they did make one for this one, I'm just thinking to myself that the iPhone SE at $399 is a really good value. But imagine if there was a bigger version that actually addressed some of the complaints I have in this video that came in at around, let's say, $599. I think a lot of people would scoop that one up too. But again, I have to admit that smaller can be better because having a phone that is this easy to handle is refreshing. It's a feeling that I got with the smaller Pixel 3a back in the day. I totally am into the higher quality of life when it comes to simple aspects, like how I can easily maneuver around the hardware even if some of the luxuries and the extra features are kind of dialed back. And the thing is, when it comes to a phone like this, I can actually put a case on here and not feel like I'm blowing up the size of the phone too much. Like for example with D-Brand and their grip case. I actually got a bunch of these skins for it, and the grip case not only adds a little bit more protection and gives the phone an even better grip, but you can customize it using any one of the skins that D-Brand has in their library. If you got the iPhone SE yourself and you want to give it maybe a safer feel, but also a different look, check out the link in the description for more from D-Brand. But the thing is, one of the luxuries we've become accustomed to in current smartphones, especially in the flagship segment, is that the screen takes up basically the entire front experience. Now obviously when it comes to the handling of a phone, size can be a bit of a debate, but then you look at the screen and you realize that there's so much up top and so much on the bottom. This is a classic iPhone design before the days of the iPhone X. Okay, so there's a home button again, and there's that fingerprint reader in there for Touch ID returning, but then there's an entire area on the opposite side made for symmetry, and this makes one of the biggest bezels we've seen in a phone in recent memory. But those features are there for a reason, and that's because nostalgia is a hell of a drug. It's a design that we haven't seen in a few years, and by bringing it back, every person that has held onto a pre-iPhone X device felt seen and felt heard. And that's totally fine because Apple managed to not only nostalgia signal, but to also prove that they can bring back old design hardware with better internals. That way it really catches up to everything that we're used to in 2020. And actually, the nostalgia kind of hit me a little bit when I first got this phone. When I was at Android Authority, I barely had any opportunity to be part of that Apple hype that everyone had in 2016 or 17. The most I did was, well, get the phones and drop them for the channel. I was always on the outside looking in, and my nostalgia actually comes from a place of wistful remembrance back to a simpler time, which is probably common for a lot of us today. But when it comes to this phone, I got the SE, I unboxed it, I actually did drop my first unit on accident, and then I replaced it immediately, and then I used that iPhone SE, this one in my hand, as my main for a while. And in some weird time capsule sort of way, I felt like I was making up for lost time that I did not have 3 or 4 years ago. But the thing is, by bringing back this particular design, there are certain features that might be, let's say, missing in action. Things like face unlock, which I get it, may not be the most important thing right now, especially in the mask-wearing era, but you also have other features like a missing headphone jack, higher storage options, especially since 64 gigabytes is the base model. Now, you can't argue that most of these things are probably just features that are meant to be on higher-end smartphones that cost more, and that's totally understandable. But it's kind of a missed opportunity when you have people who will probably buy this and make this a best-selling phone in 2020, and yet those features don't get to penetrate that amount of the market. For example, there are a lot of people who probably need to buy this phone at this price point but can't put the rest of the money down for other accessories like, let's say, AirPods or other Bluetooth accessories. I don't necessarily think that this phone is made for the avid content creator or a shutterbug, more on that in a second, but only having 64 gigabytes in the base model still feels like a bit of a travesty in 2020. After all, once you fill up your iCloud storage, there goes more money going to more space. Now, on the topic of the pictures and videos that you might take and inevitably fill up all of the space with, well, there's one big caveat I have to mention here. Obviously, I'm kind of spoiled by all of the other smartphones that I use on the daily or review, including my iPhone 11 Pro. Now, there's a phone that really puts some effort into being a great content creator's tool, and some of that does appear in the iPhone SE, especially with the processor that's in here. You do get a number of different features that the higher iPhone 11s are able to bring to people, like portrait modes and 4K recording and all of that, but unfortunately the iPhone SE is just sort of cut at the knees by only having one lens on the rear. Credit where credit is due, Apple is able to pull out a lot of really good stuff from just this one lens, but without a wide angle or without a zoom, you don't have a whole lot of options for the type of people who might actually want to get creative with their captures. Not to mention the fact that there's actually one feature that we're all still scratching our heads on when it comes to its omission, and that is a night mode. So while this is a very affordable device and its price point does reflect the kind of things you do get in this phone, I could just see a lot of people eventually feeling like they wish they had a little bit more in those situations where a wide angle or a night mode would come in handy. And that's the same feeling I think those people are going to get with the battery life. Nostalgia brings with it some classic tropes, including that of the battery life. I make this joke all the time, but it's literally the conversation I would have with a lot of people who had the iPhone 6 or 7 back in the day. They're pretty much maybe halfway through their day and they start asking everyone if they have a charger available. Now, again, for a phone this small and at this price, it's no surprise that the battery life is not going to be super stellar. So here's me giving more points over to Apple for actually keeping that in mind with their quality of life additions. While there are some bits and pieces of the hardware that are missing from this phone, there are other features that are actually really appreciated. And when it comes to the battery life, it's actually easy to juice it back up because this phone is considered a mid-ranger but still has fast charging. It's just that there's no fast charger in the box, obviously. The other thing that's really convenient is the fact that this phone has wireless charging as well. This is the inverse of my missing in action complaint because these are features that you would normally expect from higher end phones, but for $399, if you're able to top up the battery pretty quickly using a fast charger, well, then you're back in action pretty quickly. It really goes to show you how we have changed our perspectives and priorities in smartphones when different amenities and bells and whistles are no longer as prioritized as fast charging and even wireless charging. And the same thing goes for the Bionic A13 and iOS, the way that it powers this particular phone. Apple has never had to play the spec race because they are able to cater every level of their hardware to every level of their software. And the combination of everything that is in the iPhone SE does work to great effect here. You get the easy home button to just wake and use the fingerprint reader to get right into iOS, which moves along just as speedily as it would on an iPhone 11 or an iPhone 11 Pro. And even though iOS may not necessarily be my cup of tea, I can't deny the fact that it works so smoothly on here that the iPhone SE is clearly a good daily driver phone that you can have for less. And that takes me to my final takeaway. I mentioned earlier that the iPhone SE kind of blew the doors down in terms of what a value for money phone could look like, but it also blew the doors down on one other place, and that's Apple's own walled garden. One of the complaints that even I make about Apple products is that they tend to be really expensive, which means that the barrier of entry is generally pretty high. It's hard to find deals on Apple products, and even then, if you're looking to change things up from a previous iPhone, you're still being asked to pay quite a bit of money for the current versions of their flagship devices. But what strikes me about the iPhone SE is that it is one of the easiest to recommend phones of 2020 thus far. And if you're just looking to get into any portion of the Apple ecosystem and just see what the fuss is all about, well, $399 is a very low barrier of entry. And even if you do have an iPhone 11 or an iPhone 10, let's say maybe you have a cracked screen or you just dropped it one too many times, well, at the very least, you can stay in Apple's ecosystem with a phone that still gives you many of the same experiences with a few compromises along the way. And so there you have it, my top 5 takeaways along with my top 5 complaints. It's important to remember that there are always some good takeaways from every smartphone, especially if it's a good smartphone, but there are always going to be things you have to keep in mind if, even at $399, you're going to be getting this phone and you want to get the best for your money. So far in 2020, the iPhone SE is still one of the easiest to recommend smartphones, and I'm actually really excited to see how it stacks up to its competitors in the Android space because a lot of them are going to be coming out in the next couple of months. So I invite you to stick around here on my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and maybe hit that bell over on the side so you can keep up with all of the content I do here at JV. You can drop some likes on this video at the very least, but if you want to start a conversation in the comment sections, make sure you let me know what you think, or some complaints, some takeaways, or maybe what your experience has been with this little guy right here. And with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, I would just remind you to enjoy your tea, everybody.